Hi, welcome back. I'm Rebecca, and this is Rapacious Reads. This week I read The Good Soldier by Madox Ford, which was published in 1915. So when you see a book like that, published in the beginning of the 20th century, called The Good Soldier, you think it's a First World War novel, right? Well, it's not. It's referred to as the greatest French novel written in English, and is in fact about an affair. So one of the first things that drew me to this book when I first started reading it was the introduction written by Ford in 1927. He's talking about the process of writing, and he says, "I at least should not be able to write a novel by which I should care to stand before reaching the age of 40. And it kind of matches my own opinions on writing. So then you just picture this man, the date of his 40th birthday, he sits down and he writes a novel, and it's a novel he's been thinking about for 10 years. It's just a beautiful picture to me, and one of the reasons I really enjoyed his writing, because when you first open up, the narrator is thinking about how to tell a story, and he's like, oh, should I start here? Oh, but you'll need to know this, and you can see him sort of like presenting all this information to you. And Ford does something interesting where he'll say a paragraph, and then he'll be like, oh, but you need to know this other information. So he'll have pages and pages of information, so you know the backstory now. And he repeats the same paragraph that he had at the very beginning, again, word for word. And I just found that really interesting. And then some other time, he writes this sentence, like wondering about the evils of Florence or something like that. And he goes on, and he leaves a sentence ending in an ellipses. And then 3 pages later, he's like, oh, but I left that sentence dangling back there. Maybe I should finish it. And having finished the book, I know that it's the narrator who's doing that, but when I first started, I thought it was Ford, and I thought it was beautiful and funny. Okay, so the overall narrative structure of the book is like a crumpled piece of paper. You are starting on the outside, and you're working your way in. Oh, that noise is probably really annoying. You're working your way in, and then sometimes you'll be like, oh, I opened the wrong section, so you'll re-crumple it, and you'll uncrumple a different thing. So it's not a linear novel. It's kind of like the untangling of a problem, and this is the Everyman collection. So the introduction in this talks about the only way to work through a psychological problem is to give birth to it and make it the psychological problem of another person. So that is what Ford does by presenting his novel to you, and that is what I am doing by presenting this video to you. Okay, so because the narrative is like that, I would suggest you not watch this video if you haven't read it, because spoilers. Yeah. Okay, so I think that the overall symbol for this novel is the hand of God with the couple on in the distance, and the forlorn person off by themselves. And I think this could stand in for so many different couples in the novel. So it could be Lord Ashburnham and Leonora with a mistress looking on. It could be Florence and Captain Ashburnham with Leonora looking on. It could be this climactic scene in the novel, Captain and the girl with Florence looking on. Or, as given by like the last chapter in the book, it could be Captain Ashburnham and the narrator with Leonora looking on. So I just feel like it's so flexible. And if I were to design a cover for this book, that's what I would put on it, is the hand of God and a couple and a third off by themselves. And this being a French novel, I think it would be very fitting. Okay. So So, page 99. Okay. Okay. One of my favorite scenes in the novel is after the funeral, 10 days, yes, 10 days after Edward has died, after his funeral, the narrator and Leonora are having a conversation, okay? And she says something like, Edward has only been dead 10 days and yet there are rabbits on the lawn. And then there's a pause in the conversation and she says, I think it was stupid of Florence to commit suicide. And then there's 3 paragraphs before the next line of dialogue, which is, did Florence commit suicide? I didn't know. I just laughed. The narrator is so naive. Okay, so this kind of reminds me of an instance in my own life. I heard my little brother talking on the phone romantically to someone, and I was about to like pull some big sister shit and, you know, grind his gears. My mom grabs my arm, pulls me off to the side, and she's like, he's talking to his boyfriend. Shh. And I was just like, whoa, my brother is gay. Like, my whole life, didn't notice that. Just, like, mind blown. And it's because, you know, you have this innate selfishness where you don't really care about other people's lives. And then you realize, like, you look back and you're like, oh, that's why they did that thing and that other thing. And you can put it all back together. And that's kind of what the narrator is doing this whole book. Now, you could call him an unreliable narrator. He changes his mind several times, but I don't think it's unreliable narration. I think what he's doing is he's unfolding this psychological problem. So he's trying on different emotions and he's seeing if they fit. So when he opens the novel, he calls Florence, oh, poor Florence, because that was the emotion he had most commonly towards Florence. And he doesn't like that emotion. He tosses it aside and he's like, oh, I hated Florence. And he's like, no, that's not quite right either. So then he's like, oh, I felt nothing for Florence and I shan't mention her again. And he's like, yeah, that's how I feel. Which to me isn't unreliable narration at all. Okay, so the most horrific line in the novel for me was when the narrator says that he was in love with the captain because he was like himself. No. Okay, you just spent 200 pages telling me why Captain Ashburnham is so wonderful, how he donates to society and he cares about the less fortunate, and he just fell into these passionate affairs because he couldn't help himself, and how he was a red-blooded man and he worked as a soldier. And then there's you, okay? You're a fucking cuckold. Okay, not by one woman, but by 2 women, okay? So first Florence cheats on you and leads you on your merry way, and you're basically a virgin the whole novel. And then you take Captain Ashburnham's leavings and say, oh, I only wanted to stop being a nurse. Obviously you didn't, because you willingly took this other person on. You are nothing. Okay. I think that leads in to how the narrator calls Florence a paper person. And I saw that early on in the novel when she first touches Edward Ashburnham's wrist, because she touches it very lightly. And then Leonora grabs the narrator's wrist. And just a few pages before, Leonora's wrist had been pointed out as the eye, like, draws its way to her wrist. So everyone has a wrist in this scene except for Florence, because Florence isn't real. And then often the narrator will refer to her as a created human, and he it's sort of like a double entendre. So yes, he means creation as in humanity, but he also means Florence has created herself. Florence isn't real. So we have created Florence, and then the last scene with the girl, he says that it is a picture without meaning. So she's got her perfect hair, her hands folded. She sounds perfectly normal, and it all means nothing. It's a picture without meaning. So the girl too becomes a paper person. Okay. But I think the real paper person is the narrator. He has all this money, more than Ashburnham. He does nothing with it. He leaves it to the Hurlbirds to donate. He doesn't work for a living. He nurses his wife, but really he just takes her to a spa and then sits around doing nothing. He's a useless human, and he's trying to justify his existence by saying, look at this beautiful, sentimental, well-rounded, loving man. I'm just like him. No, you're not, okay? Fuck off. And leave Captain Ashburnham alone. Okay, so the last couple scenes, I mean, I keep saying last scenes, but like, it's this, okay? So when they're all in the English house in the countryside, the girl, Leonora, and Captain Ashburnham, and Leonora is pushing Nancy to sleep with her husband. She's like, oh, but he'll always be my husband, but you must lie with him. He belongs to me, but you must belong to him. It reminded me of the Bible story of Rachel and Leah, when Rachel pushes her handmaid towards Jacob and says, you must lie with her. I was getting that sort of vibe here, that biblical thing, like, he's still my husband, he's still mine, but you have to sleep with him. So those are all my thoughts on the book, and I'm going to be back next week with a take video.